People have been asking some really interesting questions and making some really good comments on the back of that Prince Harry defamation video. The one where I've said um, Paul Burrell. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Thank you for somebody pointing out that it's the Scottish one, not the French one. But the one where I've said he can't sue. So let's talk about perjury, contempt of court, and perverting the course of justice. Okay. So in terms of questions, one question I've been asked a lot is I can answer quite quickly. Yeah, I do actually have more than just this one shirt. However, this one has a really handy buttonhole for the microphone, so that's why I always wear it. But yeah, to clarify on this idea of litigation privilege, that you cannot be sued for anything you do pertaining to any sort of legal proceedings, that also applies to stuff that it is patently false. Okay, so if somebody rings the police and makes a false allegation about you, you can do nothing about it. Similarly, in civil proceedings, somebody says all sorts of terrible things about you, and they're demonstrably wrong. And even if you suffer a loss as a result of that, you personally have no cause of action. The rationale behind that is that on a sort of utilitarian basis, it's better that some people suffer a misjustice in terms of there's no remedy for false accusation, but rather than discourage people from making genuine reports because they just worry about the hassle of being sued. Because even if they were to win, being sued is never a nice thing. However, the mere fact that you personally don't have a cause of action doesn't mean there's nothing that can be done. Because the state can take action in, whether that's in terms of a prosecution or a judge in a court case. So say, for instance, somebody makes a false allegation to the police, okay, and it turns out it's just not correct. It could be anything from wasting police time to perverting the course of justice or an attempt to pervert the course of justice, because you're framing somebody effectively, and you can be prosecuted for that, and people are. Okay. Also, within, say, court proceedings themselves, like people ask about perjury. Perjury is making any false statement in judicial proceedings. So the obvious example is, when you're giving evidence, but it applies to all sorts of documents as well, and situations. So, making a witness statement, birth certificates, all that sort of thing. There's loads of situations where you are making a statement under penalty of perjury. And again, that is something you can be prosecuted for. One little thing about perjury is it requires what we call corroboration. You can't be convicted of perjury on the evidence of just one witness as to the falsity of the statement. Now, sometimes there might be no dispute that the statement is false, because there'll be, it'll either be accepted it's false, or there's numerous, other bits of evidence. If you admit it's false, that's one piece of evidence, and somebody says, I know that's false, that's two. So that's how it works. But that's the idea, that you don't get a conviction just on a he said basis. Okay, so that's the rationale behind that. Perjury conviction cases, they're not particularly common. I mean, they quite often arise more in criminal cases. Okay, so people give false evidence to either convict somebody or to get somebody acquitted. Then people, that's the situation, might be prosecuted. In civil cases, I mean, first of all, the thing to remember is judges tend not to like calling anybody a liar. So they use all these things like, I prefer the evidence of, or, when it comes to assessing this evidence, I am more persuaded by. Because they recognise that a lot of time, people aren't necessarily being intentionally dishonest. Memory is reconstruction, not recall. So, a lot of people, by the time they're giving evidence, they genuinely believe it. But let's say that somebody isn't, they are just lying. Well, a lot of the time, the consequences are you just lose the case. Also, it may be reflected in damages. You could end up with having to pay damages on, in costs, where we say you pay on an indemnity basis. So that sort of thing. So yeah, losing the case is generally seen as the penalty. There have been cases, though, of perjury on the back of civil proceedings, usually when people have launched proceedings, and they are the party, they are the claimant. I mean, there's Jonathan Aitken, and Jeffrey Archer sort of spring to mind, because but the rationale there was with Jonathan Aitken. He had launched this massive sort of attack on the press and gone out there with his trusty sword of justice, and it was just held to be in the public interest. That something like that. I mean, yes, the newspaper, they would get all their costs, so they weren't necessarily financial, in trouble, in a loss. I mean, and also, the PR they got on the back of that and all the stories they could do, it's probably the best thing that ever happened to them. But even so, it was determined that there should be a prosecution for perjury. Okay. Another thing is contempt of court. Now, contempt of court it's not a criminal offence. It's a civil matter. It's the courts controlling their own procedures. Although, you can get sent to prison. Interestingly, though, you don't have a criminal record. I mean, it will be listed somewhere, like on a DBS possibly. But it's not a criminal conviction. So it's one of these really weird things. Quite a few lawyers I know have been threatened with contempt, and one particular person actually did spend a few hours in the cells, which was amazing because when word got out, the clients she got on the back of that, hey, she's willing to go to prison for you. But yeah, so you've got this thing called contempt. Now, a judge can act on their own volition, or a party can apply to hold somebody in contempt. And this is something again where somebody gives false evidence. Okay, so we're not going to report this to the CPS and go after you for perjury, but there has to be some consequences. So a judge might say, right, I am holding you in contempt, or a party might actually apply, and you have a little sort of mini trial within the trial or after the trial. Some contempts of court have to be dealt with separately, because it all depends on whether it's deemed to be something that's within a trial and needs to be dealt with there and then, or whether it's something that can affect the course of justice, but look, we can sort this out afterwards because there's no immediate threat to any sort of ongoing proceedings. Because the idea for that with some contempts is that the judge is both the witness and the person who makes the decision. So it's considered to be not very fair. But judges can say, well, I'd found you lied, so we don't need somebody else to second guess me. I saw you in the witness box. In that particular case, the consequences, penalty for perjury, it can be a fine, it can be sort of spending some time in the cells. But again, the courts do try to discourage applications for contempt of court because there's this whole thing about satellite litigation. That look, we've had the main dispute. The right party has won. Justice has been done. Everybody, the costs are going the right way. So look, why do we just have to add more onto this? That's not to say they never happen. Again, it tends to be you've gone slightly beyond the just usual. Well, I'm turned up in court and I'm sort of going to have just going to fib a bit to help my case. But rather than more, it's going to be a conspiracy to do false evidence. You say this, you say that. Let's do if there's a planning element, it can be that. But I'll just leave you with, I used to be able to practice in Ireland before a certain event, and the Irish bar, it's an amazing place, and I'll have to tell you about how they work over there. It's really, really interesting. But there's a joke somebody told me, an Irish law joke, which was, it's something, judge to witness. Do you know what happens to people who lie under oath? Yes, in my experience, they usually win the case. What's that, Lord Luverduck? Oh, yes. If you consider... do you know what? I should just leave this on to show how useless I am. Yeah, please, if you like this, consider clicking the like button and also consider subscribing. Cheers, mate.